Hi, I'm Dr. Avanti Singh. In over 20 years of practicing both Western medicine and Eastern healing traditions, the most important thing that I've learned is that healing is a journey we take together. So on this podcast, I'll be demystifying Ayurveda and other integrated medicine, showing how these simple, ancient practices are the keys to unlocking a healthy modern life. We are all healing catalysts because healing starts within. It starts with you, and it starts right now. This is a Soulfire production. Episode number 126. So, how are you, my friends? I'm not asking this as an intro to the episode today. I'm asking because I know that I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed and wonder how you're all feeling. So really, how are you? Are you feeling increased waves of stress and anxiety that seem to be a hallmark of our times? Are you finding it hard to navigate the challenging headlines of our current modern world? Are you constantly checking social media for the latest updates on world events and politics? Or are you avoiding the news altogether because it puts you into a state of panic? If you answered yes to any of those questions, and it's hard to imagine that you didn't answer yes to at least one of those questions, don't go anywhere. Because today on the podcast, as we begin the month of May and Mental Health Awareness Month here in the United States, we're discussing the pervasive feelings of powerlessness that so many of us are feeling right now, and how to reclaim our peace, our strength, and our resilience in the chaos of a world that often feels too hard to handle. Hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome back to the Healing Catalyst podcast. I'm so glad to be back with you again this week. And today I'm joined by my friend, Dr. Tanmeet Sethi, to help us untangle the knots of overwhelm and anxiety and find calm in the storm of a world that feels really, really hard right now. This is a continuation of a series that we started in March called Ignite, because we know that these conversations will ignite you to think about things differently and then try doing things differently. In these episodes, you all get a chance to listen in on my and Dr. Tanmeet's conversations about the things that we're thinking about and hearing about from our patients and our students and from our families and our friends, and even experiencing ourselves. For those of you who don't already know her, Dr. Tanmeet Sethi is an integrative and psychedelic medicine physician, author, TEDx speaker, and activist who has dedicated her career to care for the most marginalized patients in Seattle's refugee, uninsured, and unhoused populations, as well as global communities traumatized by man-made and natural disasters, as senior faculty for the Center for Mind-Body Medicine. Her first book, Joy is My Justice, Reclaim Yours Now, was published a year ago in May 2023, and it's a radical call to claim joy as our birthright, the deepest liberation we can know, and a path to power through oppression. Dr. Sethi is also a clinical associate professor at the University of Washington and a primary clinical investigator there on the sacred plant medicine psilocybin. In her clinical practice, she weaves modern and ancient medicine to catalyze the most profound healing in her patients. In our conversation, Dr. Tanmeet and I discussed the hidden impact of election stress disorder and anticipatory stress in the face of global unrest on our mental, emotional, and physical health. Dr. Tanmeet also helps us understand complex emotions through the lens of polyvagal theory and why the vagus nerve is critical for feelings of safety and connection. We also dive into practical strategies for living with more ease and regulating our nervous systems. Our discussion is focused on the importance of recognizing and pausing to notice our emotions, utilizing tools like breathwork and meditation for emotional and physiological regulation, the grounding power of rituals in creating certainty in uncertain times, and the small intentional steps you can take every day to regain control over your mental and emotional landscape. If you're feeling overwhelmed by the headlines or struggling with anxiety about the future of our world, you're not alone. And this conversation is where we discuss ways to navigate a world that feels relentless. I am so happy to share my Ignite conversation with Dr. Tanmeet Sethi as we explore how to cope with a world that is very complex, but and also full of possibilities for healing and growth. Hi, Tanmeet. How are you, my dear?
Hi, I'm really good.
Good. I'm so glad to be back with you again. I love doing these episodes with you.
They're so fun.
They really are. I know that I say this every time we are on the podcast together, which has been like, I don't know, 6 or 7 times already, and it's going to continue. But I love doing these with you because I just feel like I'm actually sitting with you, having a cup of chai or coffee or whatever, and just sitting and talking about things that we are noticing. So I love that we can do this and let everybody listen in on our conversations. It's really fun.
Yeah. And I have ahas every time. So
I do
it's
too.
great.
I do too. Okay, so let's jump in. So today we are talking about a mental health topic. We are in the month of May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. And we had a lot of ideas about what to talk about. And I know one of the ones that kept coming up is sort of what we're hearing from students, patients, our kids, our partners, our friends, that everyone is feeling a lot of overwhelm, anxiety, stress, feeling powerless in a world that feels really, really hard right now. And you mentioned that maybe we should talk about how do you sort of move forward in a world that feels so hard and so stuck. Am
Yeah.
I paraphrasing that correctly?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're really talking about how to live with some ease in a world that's so hard.
Mhm.
And also just, we both say this often, but just a disclaimer to everyone that we're doing this as with everyone else, practicing that we're just human like everyone. And also, this world is really broken. And
Mhm.
so I really just want to extend empathy and grace to everyone the way I'm trying to do for myself every day, that it's just really hard.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And, I think we just add to what so many people have been feeling for so many years, especially in the United States. And it feels like it's just compounding every day, every year. And, we have a big election cycle happening in the United States this year, which it doesn't matter where you are, on what side, what political affiliation you have or don't have, everyone is feeling stress over it. I know that because I've talked to people who are on both sides of it. And everyone's feeling sort of this election stress that's already starting in May. And the
Right.
election's not till November.
Right. And it's even hard to think about November with
Right.
what's happening in the world right now in the Middle East. And, this eruption around the country of protests is really a sign of how much we are, just frustrated and feeling really lost.
Mhm.
And it's a lot to bear.
Yeah, it really is. And so I know my intention, and I'm going to speak for me, but and you can correct me, but I feel like my intention for this episode is really to help the listeners and us talk about it for ourselves, like you mentioned, give us some strategies of how to sort of regulate our nervous system in this environment that we are in. So that's my intention.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good way to put it. I think that's my intention too, other than just also, just allowing people the grace that they can say, this is hard and I'm going to try what I can. And when it's
Mhm.
hard on some days, you just have to accept that it doesn't always work to regulate everything.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I have some data that I pulled up, from something I wrote actually almost 4 years ago about something called election stress disorder. And I mentioned this to you, which is actually, it's not a medical diagnosis, but it's really a very real phenomenon that, I think has just kind of hung around in the background. and it's getting more intense, like we said. And it's a group of symptoms that a lot of therapists and people who are in, psychiatry are seeing in like huge numbers in their patients. And the symptoms are things like, obsessively looking at social media and refreshing their feed, or, preoccupation with watching the news and reading everyone's opinions, or hearing everyone's opinions, or, having sleep disturbance, or because they're so worried about what's happening in the world, right? Social anxiety because they're not sure if they're going to be walking into an event or a situation or a conversation where there's going to be a political, discussion. I know that happens a lot around the holidays and holiday gatherings with families, right? And so this term, election stress disorder, was actually first coined in 2016 during that election cycle by Dr. Stephen Stosny. And he used this term to describe the increasing number of patients that he was seeing that had this overwhelming anxiety due to stress over the election, right? Now, fast forward to 2024, and I feel like this is sort of like world stress disorder or world events stress disorder, because it's not just about the election in the United States, but it's adding on. So I just thought that was really interesting that, there's even a term that's been coined for this, which is kind of
Yeah.
sad, but it is.
Yeah. It is there. And I think it's true. I think many people can resonate with the election stress disorder, but what they might not realize is that part of what might be happening is anticipatory stress of it happening, feeling the same way as something else felt. And so there's studies to show that people feel better if they feel they can control some part of their life or environment. And so that's something to, understand, that we as humans don't like to not know
Right.
what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so part of the election stress is not knowing.
Right.
And part of what's happening now in Palestine and Israel is also a very vast sense of not understanding what will happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so anytime we're in uncertainty, it puts us into a stress state.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because there's actually, it's an emotion that's all of us feel, whether or not we call it election stress disorder or world events stress disorder or whatever. It's that anticipation of not knowing, of uncertainty, like you're saying. And I think that happens actually like just in everyday life. You feel like,
Yes.
right? And so it's just at a different level, maybe, and it's compounded by the fact that everyone's talking about it. And maybe that's what's making it heightened. But this isn't like it's not something we don't, we deal with every day. We do
Right.
deal with it every day, right? You could be anticipating, a conversation with your boss at work, or with a partner at home, or with a kid, or a neighbor, or whoever, right? And just the anticipation of having to have a conversation can just put you into, a total whirlwind. I know it does for me sometimes, very much
Mhm.
so. So I think that's a really good point, that it's not actually something that is all that different from a common feeling that we can have on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think it might just be that it's so amplified
Right.
around us in conversation and in the news. So we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Probably.
So let's talk about some practical tools, because we've talked about the problem. We all kind of know what's going on and how we're feeling. So let's really just sort of maybe go straight to some tools that we think would help everybody in this situation, things that you can be doing every day. And we kind of came up with a couple, but the first was to pause and notice. And you were the one who actually sort of defined this for me. So explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, I mean it's actually impossible to regulate or improve how you're feeling about something if you don't know what you are feeling, right? And so this idea of pause and notice is really about bringing awareness and attention to what may be going on for you. And that's something that people may not realize that we inherently try not to do. We
Mhm.
try to escape from what we're feeling because it's not usually comfortable.
Right.
And so, this idea of pause and notice allows us to both pause and notice what we're feeling, and also pause for a moment of regulation and nervous system balancing.
Mhm.
So, there's kind of two parts to it, but there's lots of different ways we can do this. I mean, I think a couple of the most common ways that people think about are meditation and breath work, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And from what I understand, or what I've read and what I understand, the neuroscience behind it really is that when you pause, you are taking a moment to get out of the fear center in the amygdala and reorient yourself into the frontal lobe, which is your executive functioning, and that is really why this works, the pause, right?
Yeah. I mean, I would add one caveat. I think that's how it works if you pause and then practice a tool like meditation or breath work or emotion labeling. We can talk about all of those, but it is sometimes when you first pause and notice, I think you are very much in your amygdala and threat center because what you notice is the stress and the threat.
Right.
And then that noticing can be a signal to you that I need to bring this into regulation, into balance. And so then we can practice some simple sort of tools in the moment that are not always easy to remember, but they are simple to learn.
Right.
And then that can, as you said, take us out of the threat center into the frontal cortex, where not only can we have more clarity and ease, but we actually can make a decision about what we need.
Yeah, I know that. I think that's really, really important that what you're saying, because you will be, as soon as you notice the emotion, that can throw you into stress because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling stressed or I'm feeling anxious or sad. And it just like heightens it a little bit. But I think your point is like, okay, pause and give yourself the chance to catch up and then make a different decision. And that's when you switch into your frontal cortex, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think of a couple of different things in this category. I think of how we can preventively be doing those practices every day, maybe to try to keep our nervous system a little more regulated. And then there's this protective aspect of doing it in the moment when we need it, right? And I think both are important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, again, knowing how to do it in the moment is extremely important. And a lot of people don't think that they can do anything, or they forget because, again, we're in the amygdala. So we're like, oh my gosh, and it just spirals out of control. I was thinking about this idea and it reminds me, I know this is totally random, but it reminds me of when I was a kid and I would write letters to my grandfather in India. Now, let me explain. I know this is completely, stay with me here. Because now we communicate by email and it's so rapid. Like literally me and you can be on the computer and we're just emailing things back and forth to each other. Like as soon as you ping me, I'm like, oh yeah. And then I send you an email back, right? It's like this constant back and forth. Whereas when I used to write letters to my grandfather, I would sit down and write the letter and then I had to put the stamp on it. Those little blue aerogram things that we could send to India.
Yes.
And, filling out his address and the whole thing and mailing it off. And I'd have to wait a couple weeks till I got a letter back from my grandfather because when we were growing up, we didn't have email and, phone calls were very expensive, especially for our immigrant parents. So we wrote a lot of letters. But it's like, it's that pause in between. And so I could be telling my grandfather about something that was going on, but he wasn't going to be able to give me an immediate reaction. There was like a pause before he could react to me. I know it's a random example, but it just reminds me of sort of slowing down the communication between people. I think this works when you're talking to people and communicating, like taking a breath before you respond. It's almost like what we're saying is, take a moment before you respond to yourself in a way.
Yeah. And you're actually making me think of something because we can talk about some breathwork practices that are easy to do in the moment. But I think there's also, I often teach the residents that I teach, to take some breaths before checking their inbox or their email. And I'm thinking now about how in the moment, if you're reading a story that's hard or you're seeing some news that is overwhelming, how, just having sort of a practice, a sort of rule for yourself that when I hear or see that, I'm going to take a few deep belly breaths.
Yes.
That's really what your story makes me think of.
No, I love that. Actually, another story that I remember is actually from residency training. I remember one attending actually taught us, I don't remember who it was, it's been so many years now. This has really stuck with me, is he said to us, before you walk into the patient's room, put your hand on the door handle and take a breath. Center yourself and then walk into the room. I have never forgotten that.
That is so cool. I didn't have the same teacher, but that's what I teach residents too.
Amazing.
I've had to do that
Mhm.
because when you're seeing so many patients in one day, there's just no other way to sort of take a moment to center.
Right.
So I think it's really important,
Yeah.
super important.
Yeah. So that totally brought that back. Oh my gosh.
What are some of your favorite breathwork practices for the moment?
Yeah, I really rely on just a simple practice that I, really kind of learned to love when I was in my yoga therapy training, which is really just to tune in to the two parts of the breath, right? The inhale and the exhale. And I teach this a lot. The inhale is, exciting. It'll rev you up. The exhale is calming. And so really, if you can just change the pattern of your breath and slow down your exhale to be a little longer than your inhale, that's really all you have to remember. You can actually shift your physiology right there, right? So just remember to lengthen your exhale. You can do it by counting. You could link it to a movement. You could link it to an affirmation that you say in your head. Whatever it is, just make it a little bit longer and you will automatically start to slow down. So I find that in the moment when I'm really stressed, I don't know that I can even remember to do any kind of a specific breath practice as we teach in yoga and Ayurveda. I just rely on this of like lengthen your exhale. So that's the one that I always use.
I love that. I use that a lot. And I think it's helpful if people understand that if we can deeply breathe into our belly, down into using our diaphragm, and then do, as Avanti just said, do a little longer exhale, even a little longer, you can try to work your way up to doubling the count, but really just even lengthening it helps. Then what we're doing is activating that vagus nerve of our parasympathetic nervous system. And that nerve is the nerve of, people often think of it as, oh, it's how you relax or calm down. That's true. But I would also just encourage people to understand that it's also the nerve that promotes safety and connection. And so what we really need when we're feeling overwhelmed is to connect to either ourselves or somebody around us and feel safe, because we're feeling unsafe. The world is really feeling that way right now. And that simple exhale lengthening might sound to people like, oh, well, that's so easy. It's not even going to do much.
Right.
And what I would just remind people is that there is real magic going on there. That's real medicine in your body.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out, because I actually don't usually focus on that. I'm always telling patients that when you extend the exhale, you're activating the parasympathetic nervous system and the vagus nerve. And so it shifts you, it down regulates you into this relaxation, calming state. But I don't always tell them that it's also creating a sense of safety and connection. And I think that is so important. I just want to tap into that and really highlight that for everyone listening, because I think that is so important. If you can tap into connection and safety, I mean, oh my gosh, like why wouldn't you take a deep breath and exhale a little longer? Because you're not only calming yourself, but you're also creating that connection and safety, which is like going to help you in so many different ways.
Yeah. And I think we really deepened that understanding when the polyvagal theory really was given to us in a more nuanced way of not just this parasympathetic, sympathetic balance, but this polyvagal theory really opened us up to understanding that there are different branches of the vagus nerve, and that the vagus nerve actually has many functions and it protects us in many ways. And so understanding that the way that we face the world and open up to the world is actually activated through what was called our ventral vagus, or our front vagus nerve branch. And so, I think it's helpful because I still remember my husband telling me a long time ago when I was trying to teach him about diaphragmatic breathing, and, he sort of like dismissed the power of it until he tried it. And then he said, this really works. And I, yeah, but it sounds too easy.
Totally. Totally.
It just sounds kind of trite,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not. It's powerful. And so, to remind yourself that you're safe in this moment
Mm-hmm.
is what we really need in this world of fear and overwhelm.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what are some breath patterns or breath practices that you use to sort of do this pause and notice step?
Yeah, if I'm in the moment, then the one I use the most is breathing deep into my belly so that my belly rises as I breathe in and my belly falls as I breathe out,
Mm-hmm.
along with lengthening that exhale. I try to double my exhale to my inhale with counting because that works well for me.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'll do box breathing where you inhale to a count of, say, 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and hold that exhale for 4. So it's just a square, same count, whatever count you choose.
Mm-hmm.
And, people often talk about how Navy SEALs use that to calm
Mm-hmm.
themselves before, a mission. But I think it really brings some quiet down to the noise
Mm-hmm.
in my mind. So those are the ones I use the most.
Mm-hmm. Great. Those are really helpful. And, it's like if you're a visual person, the box breathing, you don't even necessarily have to count. You could even like pretend like you're tracing a square. I mean, you guys can't see my hand right now, but that's what I'm doing. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. And you could just do that, with your finger or in your mind. That can also be a helpful tool to visualize the breathing that you're doing. So,
Yeah, I need to send you these breathing stickers I got. There's one right in front of me on my laptop. Mine's in a figure 8,
uh-huh.
and you put your finger on it and do inhale, exhale. And the one that I gave my son for his laptop is a square, just like you just said.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes it's my visual stimulus to just take a few breaths.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, anything that works to remind you to pause and notice. I've even told patients and students to, put an alarm on their phone to take like a mindful breath, like a breath break and have that programmed in their phone as an alarm. You could name the alarm on iPhones. You could just name it, breath break or something. And then it's a reminder to take a breath, right? To do that sort of thing and sort of make it part of your day. You also mentioned using meditation and mindfulness as a pause and notice strategy. What would you say would be a good one to use?
Yeah. So the ones I use the most are simple, really
Mm-hmm.
simple. The first, because you were talking about in the moment, sort of
Yes.
what do I need? So one is that I just really ground into my body and notice what I'm feeling. So if I'm standing, that means I feel my feet on the earth
Mm.
and then kind of do my own kind of body scan from the feet up to the head and just noticing my body. And that brings me into my body and more awareness about what I'm feeling. Sometimes I'll just, especially if I'm feeling a huge range of emotions, I'll imagine each emotion in a bubble and have it kind of float in front of me and float away. And it's just that I kind of look at it and allow it to pop. It doesn't mean it goes away. It
Right.
means that I'm just getting some space from it
Yes.
so that I can understand it better.
Mm-hmm.
And that really helps, especially if I'm feeling a lot of different ones, then I can put them all in bubbles and allow them to be softer and have some space and distance from me.
Mm-hmm. I love that you said you create some space. I think that's so key because that's really what we're doing with this strategy of pause and notice. We're creating some space. We're slowing things down because we live in this crazy world of do more, do more, do more, be more, be more, be more, go, go, go. We are always going so fast that what we're saying is really to slow down and create some space, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so those are great. I think those are a lot. Just meditation, mindfulness, breath. We've given a lot of strategies here for the pause and notice. So let's go to the next step that we talked about, which was finding rituals for certainty. And I also took a note that it's also another way to think about it is, I think, is feeling some certainty using rituals. So it's two ways to think about it, right?
Yes.
So what do we mean by this?
Yeah. So there's actually science to show that people can get calm and ease in uncertain times with rituals. I mean, we see this most often in sports. People have their rituals around how they start a game,
Yes.
how they walk around the court and huddle before a game,
Right.
What you do before you get on the podium to dive into the water. Many athletes have talked many times about their rituals. And they sort of get poo-pooed as superstitions, but what they are really ways to ground themselves because they have no idea what will happen in this event or game, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so we see how rituals can actually bring us. I mean, there's a lot of evidence around people talk about their morning rituals, for instance, about how they set them up to win the day, quote unquote. And I don't love that. I think it sounds really military tough kind of style.
Right.
But what I do think is that they are important, whether they're in the morning or the evening or whenever, but that they're not about winning the day. They're about finding a soft place to land, that they're about finding a touchstone when the world feels really uncertain and hard.
Right.
And so, sometimes I find, I wrote about this in my book too, that people don't call things rituals that are rituals. And even that mere act of naming a ritual has been shown to change the energy of it.
Oh, wow.
And so how do you get your coffee in the morning? How do you sit in the morning and drink it? How do you start your day, period? Do you start it looking at your phone I would suggest not to. If you're feeling overwhelmed, then I would not do that. What do you do so that your day feels like you are ready to try to meet your day instead of it becoming an onslaught on you from the very beginning?
Right.
And so rituals are critical, I think.
Yeah. And I think the idea of using them as touchstones throughout the day, right? To be able to just like you go there and touch it and you just like let yourself calm down, regulate your nervous system. I think that's super important. I wanted you to go back to something that you mentioned a little while ago when we were talking about pause and notice, about polyvagal theory. Because I remember reading in your book, you talked about it so beautifully, like explained it so beautifully in your book. And it spoke to me in the way that you talked about it. And I do think that it's really, really helpful to understand polyvagal theory because, again, going back to the whole vagus nerve, creating safety and connection, I don't know that a lot of us always remember that. So could you explain that to us right now? Polyvagal theory.
Yeah. I mean, how it's explained is sort of this ladder. I like to think of it as a circle more. But so the way that I explained it was that there is this sympathetic nervous system, and then there is this vagus nerve of your parasympathetic, which is divided into what's called a ventral vagus and a dorsal vagus. And for anyone who doesn't know those terms, ventral is front facing and dorsal is of the back. And they're both necessary. But what the ventral vagus does is actually what people think the vagus does all the time is connect, ease, relax, help us connect and open to the world. And the dorsal vagus actually helps us shut down. Now, people might not think that's helpful, but it is helpful if you need to dissociate and shut down in a very dangerous or abusive situation. There are times where that is the way to survive.
Correct.
And so there's this sort of very magical, artful circle between the three. And we go between all of them all the time. You can imagine when you read a piece of news that's really jarring, you might be really jittery and agitated in your sympathetic nervous system. And let's say you try to shut down with your dorsal vagus and escape with maybe scrolling on social media or something. And maybe you're lucky enough that when you're scrolling, you get to a cat video or a breathing exercise that helps you get into your ventral vagus.
Sure.
But maybe you get into another jarring story that pushes you back into that jitteriness. And it makes it harder even. It's almost like it amplifies to get you back to the ventral vagus. So I think also the way that I find this really helpful is that for people to understand that if you have been shut down and disconnected for a while, if you do some of these calming practices like pausing with meditation or mindfulness or breathing or rituals, you may first feel a little jittery. It may move you into the sympathetic on that circle before you get to a little more ease. And to know that that's actually normal, but that's why it's helpful to do it with support of a guide or a therapist or a friend in a community, to not be alone. But it is more nuanced than people think. It is not this shuttle between stress and not stress.
Right.
It's not so easy.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way we all learned about it in high school biology, right? The image of the caveman running from the lion, right, was the example to illustrate sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous system. And that, what a lot of us just like default think of is stress or relaxation, activation or relaxation, right? Not the connection and the safety. And so I think what we're saying here is that you can use rituals as a way to switch into the ventral vagus nerve.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, it can be a softer place to land to make sure that you have a sense that you are okay and safe right now. Maybe not in the world at large, but in this moment.
Right.
And so what is it that you do to start your morning, to start a work day? What is it you do to start a meal? I mean, where are your rituals? Where are your touchstones and places to land? Because the day is full of jarring parts. Right. And so looking at that, you can kind of start to understand that maybe I need to have more rituals and more almost an affirmation that I am making a ritual, right? I teach this to my residents too, but I don't start a day of clinic without putting my hand on a stone on my stethoscope and doing a little meditation of compassion. For me, that's a ritual of how I start that, open up that day.
Right.
I light a candle if I'm writing that day. I light a candle before I write. And it's not that, takes all my stress away.
Right.
It's that it reminds me, oh, this is a sacred moment in the day where I'm connecting to myself and I'm connecting to the fact that I am putting importance on what I do and how I am.
Right.
And so that can be, cooking a meal or whatever it is.
Yeah. And so I think that there's two things I'm thinking about while you're saying that, is that you can both have these rituals that you always do every day, right? Because that can help you feel certain. So whether it's your morning ritual, making your coffee, or going for a walk, whatever it is, you could create that ritual and just try and do it every day to create that certainty. But then I think there's another piece to that, is also that when you are feeling very overwhelmed, you take that pause and notice, right? But then you have some rituals that you can do, right, to help you calm down further. And I always suggest like making a list on your phone, because that damn phone goes with us everywhere. So let's use it for something that's going to help us. Like make a list in your app or your notes app or something of like, rituals to calm down. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. And make a list of like 3 or 4 things that you could do that, calm yourself down. Because in the moment, again, it's hard to remember, like, what do I do right now? Right?
Yes.
So I think it's both ways of like having the rituals to create certainty every day, but then also having the rituals to help move into certainty and safety and connection during the day.
Yeah. I love that frame. I think that's exactly right.
Okay. Cool. All right. So let's move on to the third step, which was this idea of small steps. I'm going to let you talk about this one first.
Okay. What I'm really thinking about with these small steps is that, the more overwhelming the world is, the more the onslaught of the happenings and the news around it, the more of our thoughts that onslaught spiral around it, the more we feel narrowed in and closed in, like there's no power, no hope, nowhere to go, nothing to do. And then we shut down. We almost say, well, I can't do anything to make it better, so I'm just going to shut down. And, this idea of small steps is that, every small step contributes to a path forward. And so what if I think it's like you're saying with the rituals, like what if you had some small steps that you could do in the moment when you're feeling closed in? You've paused and noticed, and you know that you're feeling powerless and closed in. It's time to take some small steps so I can create a wider lens than this narrow one.
Right.
And so I think what we're both saying is that starts with regulating your nervous system.
Right. Right. Yeah. And so the small step is actually regulating your nervous system. So it's really this idea of starting with yourself and then moving outward. So many of us, I think, because we're compassionate human beings that we really want to help others, help people in the world, we jump straight to what can I do for the world? And I think this is a reminder of, okay, take a moment, help yourself, and then you can proceed in a more powerful way, in a more resourced way to help others, right? It's that,
Right.
that age old, example. I know it's so trite sometimes, but, the whole in the airplane, put your oxygen mask on before you help others. Same idea, right?
Right, right. And I think, because as we said before, that allows you to move out of your threat center into that frontal cortex, because you don't even know what that small step is until you regulate that threat.
Right. So one of the things that I always think about when we're talking about the small steps, for me anyway, is to manage my media diet. And I really recommend this to everybody to think about also that, food, and always say this on this podcast, that, our nourishment doesn't just come from physical food that we're eating and drinking. It's what we're taking in all day long through all of our senses, including media. And so we're consuming media all the time, especially with those silly phones that we have all the time. I mean, they're not silly, they're helpful, but they can take over our lives, right? And so I think it's really important to think about how you're going to manage that for yourself. And I think everybody's different. For me, I know we were talking about this. For me, I find that reading about the news is much better for me than watching it or hearing it. So I find that I can regulate my nervous system much better if I'm not watching videos and hearing, a lot of dialogue and conversation and opinions about it. It just takes some of that stress away from me. I don't know how do you manage your media diet?
Yeah. Well, I don't have that kind of sense of sometimes I need video and need conversation,
Right.
but I don't need it all day, all the time. And so I'm okay with different forms of it. But I think what I've really found is that if I start my day with it, I'm completely rattled.
Right.
And I need to kind of regulate my nervous system first and then allow it to come in through the day. I also get a little rattled if I get into rabbit holes around something. So if I spiral into wanting to know every little thing about one story, then I can get really rattled.
Right.
So I think that it's important to just know what you need. But I think what you're saying, Avanti, is that just like with food, you don't know what your individual biochemistry is around food until you start noticing and sometimes taking things out and seeing what happens or putting other things in. So, what would it be like if you did some breathing before you read the New York Times or whatever a publication? And what would it be like if you said, I'm only going to read the news, twice a day instead of 10 times a day?
Right.
Sort of experimentation and noticing how that feels is really important.
Yeah, it's really important because you notice what your reactions are and how, how dysregulated you become from different sorts of media in the same way that you're talking about, different sorts of food. How do you feel? I think there's another point that I wanted to talk about, which you actually mentioned to me when we were preparing for this episode, which was this idea of being informed versus not being informed. Because I have this debate all the time with my husband, who is very much about being informed. And I'm just like, I can't handle, this much. And he gets upset with me because he's like, you can't just put your head in the sand. And I'm not at all saying that. I think, again, I'm trying to say, how do I want to take in that information? And you mentioned to me that, being informed is knowing what happened versus having 10 different opinions on what happened. And for
Yeah.
me, that was so clarifying because I think that's exactly what I've been trying to say to my husband, Kanwar, who you happen to know very well also. Like, I couldn't explain to him what I was trying to get at, but that's exactly what it was, is that for me, reading the news, that helps me stay informed. And then I, disconnect from it. So I know what's going on in the world, but I don't want all the opinions because that just stresses me out. It puts me into dysregulation.
Yeah, yeah. So you know what you need. I think what he in his defense is really referring to is something that's real, which is it's a real, I know this is not what you're saying, but it's a real privilege to be able to
Of
say,
course.
I'm just going to shut the news off,
Yes.
which
Yes.
is not what you're saying.
No.
And I don't love that either. And I think that he might be sort of worried about that sort of nuance around it.
Sure.
I think that you don't have to shut off the news. You can know what the news is. And you can also, if you step away the way you do, you might even know how you want to act in reaction to the
Sure.
news better.
Sure.
Because sometimes just reading it all day just doesn't do any good for the world either.
Right.
So, where is sort of your line between knowledge and justice, action and knowledge? Where are you
Mhm.
going to come to that? And you
Right.
have to come into your frontal cortex, into clarity.
Right. Right. Exactly. And don't become overwhelmed by it, because then what can you actually do? Right.
Right.
And I think that, another thing I was thinking about here is, the idea of boundaries. This comes up a lot. I mean, especially when we're talking about, political events, the news, what's going on in the world. Again, a lot of people have that anticipatory stress of going into conversations at work, at a gathering with their family, of like, oh my gosh, is something going to come up? And then everyone's going to get in an argument and blah, 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 like that kind of thing. So boundaries, how do you create boundaries for discussions, or, sort of, steel yourself for those situations?
Gosh, I'm going to let you go because I'm still practicing this one. I feel like I'm really good at preparing my nervous system for those
Hmm.
situations with breathing and meditation and especially movement.
Hmm.
So if I know I'm going to have a difficult experience or conversation, I'll for sure dance before I get there. Dance is how I prepare,
Hmm.
but I kind of shake it all out.
Yes.
But I am not good at what I really admire is people who can establish boundaries with people beforehand. Like, I actually think that's what we need to do, but I'm admitting that I'm not very good at sort of forethinking that out. So
Hmm.
I think that are you good at that?
I don't know. I think sometimes I am. I try to be. There's certain people that it's very hard for me, like, my parents, very hard for me to do. Other people I
Yeah.
have an easier time doing it with. And I will admit also that in the past year, I have really learned how to step into that more. I was, like you're saying, I was not good at it before at all. Like, I think it caused me a lot of distress, a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I actually have learned a lot from Melissa Urban's work around boundaries. She has a book that she wrote about it, and that really helped me actually.
Mm-hmm.
The way that she sort of describes, sort of how to give people, she uses a green, yellow, red light sort of grading system of, what you're willing to tolerate. And the way that she describes it, just that's what I aspire to, but I'm not there yet.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's amazing. I'll have to read her, but I haven't actually read the book yet, but I've heard great things about it. It's a really good one on boundaries. I don't remember the name of it. Do you know the name?
I know it's escaping me right
We'll
now.
link it in the show notes so that everybody can take a look at it. It's a good one. Yeah. And I think the point here is that, it's not about pushing people away or saying, I don't want to talk about things. It's sort of establishing boundaries, especially with loved ones, friends, and family, so that you can stay connected to them and not be afraid of interacting with them. Like, for me,
Yeah.
that's the balance, right? Of wanting to be connected, even if I disagree with someone's opinions and their stance on things, because I love them, right? And at the same time, having the boundaries. And so I don't know that we can solve this problem right now, but it's an interesting thing to think about. So I don't know that we actually help, give anybody any ideas of how to do this.
Well, no, I do think that, I think what you're saying is really important because let's say if someone listening is really overwhelmed by what's happening in the world right now and what's coming in the near future, then it can be helpful. Let's think about this. Like I just had an aha.
Mhm.
It might be helpful if my goal is to regulate my nervous system and to have some time to disconnect so that I can bring some ease back into my body so that I can manage the next day.
Mhm.
Then it might help if I'm going out with friends to say, it would really help me to not talk about X, Y, or Z
Ooh, that's a good one.
because I'm really working on how to unrattle my nervous system. So just for tonight, I'd love to avoid that topic. And
I
if
love
anybody
that.
has a problem with that, then I think you have to have some compromise because it's really upsetting to everyone, all of the news.
Right.
And so somebody else's boundary might be that I'm here to talk about it and to connect with people about it.
Right.
And maybe beforehand you could decide who's right to be at what gathering together,
Yeah.
because I think both points are valid.
Yeah.
But you're just giving me an idea that a boundary can also be sort of protecting and preparing for those
Yeah.
interactions, right? Either way.
Absolutely. And I just had an aha as you said that, because that's, sort of something we do when we're creating a sacred space, right? With patients and in clients or students, right? We will create a circle of trust and have some ground rules that we establish, right? To make everybody feel comfortable and that they are psychologically safe. And so I think that's actually what you're getting at, is that why can't we do that with our friends and family if we're going into a gathering, especially in a time like now, which is so overwhelming. There's so much going on in the world that maybe we just very lovingly suggest, could we create some, ground rules around how we are going to gather? I think that's a great idea, actually.
Yeah.
Really
Yeah. I
love
like
that.
that.
I
I
really
like
love that. I think that's a great idea. Okay, so maybe we did really help people figure
Yeah.
something out.
We help ourselves at least.
Exactly. Exactly. And then the last one that I just really want to make sure we touch on, because we're both doctors and of course we should do this, is really thinking about sleep. I
Mm,
think that, prioritizing sleep is so important for nervous system regulation. What are your thoughts?
crucial, a non negotiable.
Yeah.
I mean, the science is clear that if we're sleep deprived, we're more emotionally labile, volatile, anxious, depressed.
Yes.
We eat more sugar, which makes
Mhm.
us more anxious and have energy crashes.
And then
It's
we need
just so
caffeine.
clear. Yep.
And that does the same thing. Yep.
And then some people will counter that with alcohol, which
Mhm.
then further disrupts our sleep the next night. So,
Right.
if you are feeling overwhelmed right now by the world, it is way more important that you get off all screens in the evening and get to bed.
Yes.
That nothing will happen. There's also lots of science now around how much processing we do of that,
Yes.
of the lymphatic system and of
Mhm.
our thoughts and memories. And, it's
Right.
like a detoxification
Right.
time. So
Yep.
getting a good night's sleep is not a small suggestion. It's like an act of revolutionary self-care. So yeah, critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we talked about that last month, didn't
Mhm.
we? Yeah, in our
Yeah.
conversation. We'll link that in the show notes too. We did a whole episode, a whole conversation about sleep, in which we were talking about the lymphatic system and, the detoxification that happens during sleep and the sleep stages and all that. So if you're interested in learning more, listen to that episode. Again, we'll link it in the show notes for you. But yeah, sleep, I just think about, my kids when they were little. If they didn't sleep, oh man, the temper tantrums, the craziness that would happen the next day because they didn't sleep. I mean, and all of us are like that. It's just
Yes.
thinking about it like that. If you don't sleep, it's just harder the next day to regulate your emotions and regulate your nervous system. It's really what it
Yeah.
comes down
And
to.
there's even science, this is newer science, but showing how we process our memories during sleep. And so how memories actually can feel more difficult or challenging without enough sleep. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, there's just no two ways around it. Like,
Right.
if you're not sleeping, you are not going to be able to manage the world, even on a good day.
Mhm.
And the world as it is now without sleep would
Mhm.
be quite challenging.
Yes. I think that's really, really important. Okay, so we have talked about so many things. And so I just want to, go back and summarize one more time. So we really talked about sort of 3 tools, 3 steps really to help manage your overwhelm and stress and sort of downregulate, shift into that vagus nerve, the ventral vagus nerve for, calming and also for safety and connection, which is the first step is to pause and notice using your breath. We've talked about different breath techniques that we both have really found helpful for ourselves. And then some meditation and mindfulness practices that Dr. Tanmeet just also shared. And then the second step is finding rituals for certainty and also feeling certainty using rituals. And then the third step is the idea of small steps, right? Did I miss
Yep.
anything?
No. And in those small steps, we talked about media detoxing, boundaries, sleep,
Yes.
and first and foremost, that regulation of the nervous system.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I think that's everything. Are we missing anything? I think we got everything.
No, I think we got everything. And I would just hope that people also from this episode would gain the understanding that we're all
Yes.
challenged right now by the world and that we're right there with you. And,
Yep.
I'm practicing these things every day.
Yes, I am too. I often call you or text you and I'm like, okay, just remind me what I'm supposed to do. Or, just to check. I think that's also a great idea is to check in, have an accountability partner, someone that you can, you both can encourage each other to take a step, to, take a breath, remind each other what to do. So I think that's helpful. So you are that person for me. I do that a lot with you. So, okay, this feels like a good place to end this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Until next month.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will be back next month with our next Ignite conversation. We'll see what topic we do. Thanks, Tanmeet.
Thanks, Avanti.
Thanks again for listening to The Healing Catalyst. If you love what you heard, please hit follow and pass it along to a friend. And if you're feeling really inspired, please rate and review so that others can find this podcast more easily. To learn more, head to avantikumarsingh.com. And to connect with me directly, find me on Instagram at Avanti Kumar Singh. I'll be back next week and hope that you will be too. Until then, remember, with the right catalyst, you have the power to activate your own healing because healing starts within.